Margaret Sullivan was 67 years old, a devoted wife, a loving mother. For 43 years, she stood beside her husband, Robert, through every joy, every hardship, every quiet Sunday morning they thought would last forever. But when Robert's heart stopped that cold autumn evening, everything changed. Margaret stood by the window holding Robert's old cardigan tightly against her chest. Tears slid silently down her cheeks, carrying the weight of grief and loneliness. Suddenly, the sound of heels clicking on the wooden floor broke the stillness. Victoria, Margaret's only daughter, entered the room. Her designer coat, confident walk, and practiced look of concern made everything about her feel carefully staged. Victoria leaned down, placing a hand on Margaret's shoulder. Her voice was soft, almost sweet, but carried an edge beneath the surface. "Mom, you can't stay here all by yourself. This house is too big, too empty. Let me take care of everything for you." Margaret slowly looked up, her tired eyes searching her daughter's face for comfort. But there was something strange, something unspoken, hidden behind Victoria's gaze. Behind the gentle words there was tension. A quiet storm was forming. And Margaret didn't know yet this was the moment that would change everything. 6 weeks after Robert's funeral, the house was quiet when the sound of a car door slammed outside. Victoria stepped out, holding a folder in her perfectly manicured hands, followed closely by Kevin, her husband, carrying 2 large suitcases. They walked straight into the living room where Margaret sat on the couch clutching Robert's wedding photo. Victoria stood tall, her tones sharp, deliberate, almost rehearsed. "Mom, we've reviewed Dad's will. According to the documents, everything belongs to me. The house, the accounts, the investments. All $33 million, they're mine." Margaret froze, staring blankly at her daughter. Her lips trembled as she whispered, What are you saying, Victoria?" Victoria didn't flinch. "It means, Mom, you've been staying here out of kindness. But it's time for you to find your own place." Margaret's hands shook as she set the photo frame down, her breath unsteady, her voice breaking. This is my home. I built this life with your father." Victoria crossed her arms, cold and dismissive. "And Dad trusted me to take care of everything. You can't manage this house, Mom. It's too much for you. We'll move in tomorrow. You need to start packing tonight." Kevin finally spoke, his voice calm but detached. "It's for the best, Margaret. This is what Robert wanted." Silence filled the room, heavy, suffocating, cutting deeper than any words could. Margaret's heart shattered, but she sat frozen, watching the daughter she had raised, the daughter she had sacrificed everything for, now standing before her, taking everything away. Victoria opened her designer handbag and pulled out a thin envelope. Without looking at Margaret, she placed it on the table. "Here, Mom, this should cover a few days," she said flatly. Margaret hesitated, slowly opening the envelope. Inside were 2 $100 bills. Her voice trembled, heavy with disbelief. $200 after everything? Victoria sighed impatiently, tapping her manicured nails against the table. "Mom, don't make this harder than it has to be. There's a senior housing complex on Maple Street. It's affordable, you'll be fine." Margaret stared at her daughter, her heart pounding in her chest. Her lips quivered, but no words came out. Kevin stepped forward, his tone detached, almost transactional. "We'll load your bags into the car. It's better to do this quickly, Margaret." Margaret's hands shook as she walked slowly to her bedroom. Inside, the walls felt colder than ever. She packed 2 suitcases, 43 years of marriage reduced to clothes, a few keepsakes, and 1 small box of photographs. As she zipped the final bag, her vision blurred with tears. From the doorway, Victoria checked her watch, impatient as if this moment was nothing more than an inconvenience. Kevin carried the suitcases out, loading them into the BMW parked outside. Margaret stood silently in the living room, staring one last time at the house where she had built her life, raised her daughter, and loved her husband. Her voice broke in a faint whisper, barely audible. "This was my home." Victoria's voice, sharp and cold, cut through the air. "Not anymore, Mom. You'll understand one day this is for the best." Margaret stepped out of the house, the autumn wind brushing against her tear-streaked face. Behind her, the door closed, a sound louder than any scream. The neon sign of Sunset Inn flickered weakly in the night, casting a pale glow on the cracked pavement below. Margaret stood outside, clutching her 2 suitcases, staring at the rundown building that would now be called home. 43 years of marriage. 43 years of love, sacrifice, and stability. Now reduced to a $49 a night motel room that smelled faintly of damp carpets and cigarette smoke. Inside, the wallpaper peeled at the corners. The bed creaked with the slightest touch, and the thin towels were folded neatly on a chair. Margaret sat on the edge of the mattress, her hands resting on her lap, her breath shallow. Her chest tightened as she whispered softly to herself, How did it come to this? She looked around the tiny room. No Robert, no laughter, no warmth. The silence was deafening. For years, Margaret had believed that no matter what happened, family would always be her safe place. But tonight, the truth was unbearable. Her own daughter had cast her aside like she was nothing. Tears streamed down her face, blurring the dull light of the motel lamp. Margaret hugged the small box of old photographs, the only pieces of her life she had left. Every picture was a memory, every memory was a wound. In that dark, cramped room, she felt invisible, forgotten, and unwanted. And for the first time in her life, Margaret realized she was truly completely alone. The motel was silent except for the faint hum of the old air conditioner. Margaret lay on the thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling, her thoughts racing endlessly. She clutched the small box of photographs against her chest, holding onto the only pieces of her past she still had. Each picture told a story of love, of family, of trust. And then suddenly a memory surfaced. Robert's voice, warm and steady, echoing softly in her mind, Margaret, if anything ever happens to me, remember this. I've arranged everything so you'll always be safe. I've taken care of you in my will. You'll never have to worry. Her breath caught in her throat. Those words, she remembered them clearly. But if that was true, then why did Victoria claim everything belonged to her? Margaret sat up slowly, her hands trembling, heart pounding with confusion. Her whisper broke the silence. No, something's wrong. Something doesn't make sense here. For the first time since Robert's death, a spark of suspicion cut through her grief. The pain of betrayal was still sharp, but now Margaret began to wonder if there was a deeper truth hidden beneath Victoria's words. Morning sunlight crept through the thin motel curtains, but Margaret had barely slept. Her mind replayed Robert's words over and over. I've taken care of you in my will. You'll never have to worry. But Victoria's cold voice from that night echoed just as loudly. Everything belongs to me. The contradiction burned inside her. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, gripping Robert's old photo in her hands. Her voice was quiet but steady, carrying a new strength. No, I won't let them take everything from me, not without knowing the truth. She reached for her worn leather purse and pulled out an old business card. Harrison Fitzgerald, the family attorney who had worked with Robert for decades. Her hands trembled as she dialed the number, but her voice carried resolve. Mr. Fitzgerald, this is Margaret. I need to see you. It's urgent. 2 hours later, Margaret stepped into Harrison's office, the familiar scent of polished wood and paper filling the air. Harrison, a kind-eyed man in his 70s, stood from behind his mahogany desk, surprised to see her. Margaret, I've been trying to reach you. Victoria told me you were traveling. Margaret's brows furrowed, her suspicion deepening. Traveling, no Harrison. I've been here the whole time. For the first time since Robert's death, Margaret looked Harrison straight in the eye and said firmly, I need to see Robert's will, the real one. In that moment, Margaret wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. She wasn't the woman quietly accepting her daughter's cruelty. This was the first step, the moment she chose to stop being a victim and start fighting back. The sound of papers rustling filled the quiet office. Harrison opened a large, leather-bound folder and placed a stack of documents carefully on his mahogany desk. Margaret sat across from him, her hands trembling, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Harrison adjusted his glasses, his voice calm but deliberate. Margaret, this is Robert's final will, the one he updated 6 months before he passed. He turned the document around so she could see Robert's neat, familiar signature at the bottom. Her breath caught. This was real. Harrison continued, his tone steady but firm. According to this, you are the primary beneficiary. You inherit 70% of Robert's assets, approximately $23 million, plus full ownership of the house. Margaret blinked, stunned, her lips parting as the words sank in 70%. And the house. Harrison nodded gently. Yes, and there's more. He flipped to the next page, pointing at a section written in Robert's precise handwriting. Your daughter Victoria is entitled to $10 million, but only on one condition. Margaret leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. What condition? Harrison looked directly into her eyes. She only receives it if she treats you with dignity and respect after Robert's death. If she fails, the entire 10 million automatically reverts to you. The room went silent. Margaret's heart raced as the truth crashed over her like a tidal wave. Victoria, the daughter who threw her out, who humiliated her, who handed her $200 like she was nothing. With one cruel act, Victoria had forfeited everything. Margaret's tears welled up, but this time they weren't just from sadness. For the first time since Robert's death, she felt a spark of power return. Harrison leaned back in his chair, folding his hands together as he looked at Margaret. His voice softened, carrying both admiration and gravity. Margaret, Robert wasn't just planning for the future. He was protecting you. Margaret's brows furrowed slightly, her breath held as she waited for him to continue. Harrison tapped a finger on the highlighted section of the will. 6 months before he passed, Robert rewrote his will. He specifically included this clause, the one we just read. Margaret ran her fingertips over Robert's neat handwriting, her chest tightening, as Harrison explained. Robert suspected that Victoria might misuse her inheritance. He knew she had Kevin influencing her decisions. He feared what could happen after he was gone. Margaret's voice cracked softly. He knew. Harrison nodded slowly. Yes, he saw the way she dismissed you at family dinners, the way she rolled her eyes whenever you spoke about money, and how she treated your opinions as if they didn't matter. He noticed everything. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, tears welling up as memories of those silent, uncomfortable dinners flashed in her mind. Robert had seen it all, and he had acted quietly, decisively. Harrison's tone grew more deliberate. That's why he created the safeguard. If Victoria mistreats you in any way, her entire 10 million reverts back to you. Margaret pressed a hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. In that moment, she realized something powerful. Robert had prepared one final gift, a silent promise that his love and protection would remain even after his death. Victoria thought she had outsmarted everyone. But Robert had already made the winning move long before the game even began. Victoria slammed the heavy oak door behind her, tossing the stack of forged documents onto the table. Her voice was sharp, ice cold. "Pack your things, Margaret. This is my house now. You're done here." Margaret stood frozen, her hands trembling as she clutched the handle of her suitcase. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Kevin leaned casually against the doorway, arms folded, smirking with quiet satisfaction. Victoria reached into her purse and tossed $200 onto the counter, the bills fluttering like dead leaves. "Here, that's enough for a motel. Don't expect more." Margaret blinked through her tears, forcing her trembling hands to collect her photo box, her 2 small suitcases, her entire life, reduced to fragments of memory. She stepped outside, the air heavy with silence. Inside, Victoria thought she had won. But across town, in Harrison Fitzgerald's quiet office, a hidden clause inside Robert's will was waiting like a loaded trap. The moment Victoria ordered Margaret out, the exact moment she raised her voice and forced her mother from her own home, the clause Robert had planted triggered automatically. A single line changed everything. "If Victoria mistreats Margaret in any way after my passing, her entire inheritance is null and void." And just like that, the $33 million pyre Victoria thought she had stolen evaporated. Every dollar, every property, every asset, gone. While Victoria was celebrating her victory, the legal system was already shifting beneath her feet, silently, invisibly, irreversibly. Inside Harrison Fitzgerald's sleek office, the air felt electric, the calm before a storm. Harrison leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "Margaret, from this moment on, we fight back." He dialed a direct line to the Financial Crimes Unit. Within hours, a covert investigation was launched. The first strike came fast. Victoria and Kevin were at a luxury restaurant when it happened. Kevin handed the waiter his platinum card, but instead of the usual nod, the waiter returned with an awkward glance. "I'm sorry, sir. Your card has been declined." Kevin frowned, confused. He tried another. Declined again. At the same time, Victoria's phone buzzed nonstop. Notifications flooded the screen. "Bank alert, your account has been frozen. Transaction blocked. Please contact legal services." Her perfectly curated world crumbled in silence. Every credit card useless. Every account locked. Every dollar she thought she stole gone. Panic spread across Victoria's face. Her hands trembled as she whispered to Kevin, "What's happening to us?" Kevin's jaw tightened, but Harrison and his team were already 3 steps ahead. Through secure channels, the police obtained evidence of forged documents, fraudulent transfers, and financial manipulation. It wasn't just about freezing Victoria's accounts. This was the opening move of a much larger game, and the trap had only just begun to close. Victoria's hands trembled as she dialed Margaret's number, her perfectly polished nails digging into her palms. The moment Margaret picked up Victoria's voice cracked with terror. "Mom, something's wrong. The bank froze all my accounts. Every card is blocked. What's happening?" For the first time in her life, Victoria wasn't in control. Her voice wasn't sharp or arrogant. It was small, shaky, and desperate. Margaret held the phone close, her tone calm, almost icy. "Sweetheart, Daddy's attorney. Just read me the real will." Silence. Victoria's breath hitched on the other end. She whispered, barely audible, What do you mean the real will?" Margaret didn't soften, not this time. "It means, Victoria, the money you thought was yours. It never was." A beat of silence hung in the air before Margaret ended the call, leaving her daughter drowning in dread. For the first time ever, the power had shifted, and Victoria knew it. The knock on Victoria's door came at 6:00 a.m. sharp. It wasn't a neighbor. It wasn't family. It was 2 federal agents. Kevin opened the door groggy and confused, only to be met with flashing badges. "Victoria Sullivan," one agent asked firmly, "you and your husband are under investigation for financial fraud, document forgery, and attempted unlawful transfer of assets." Victoria froze. Her flawless makeup from the night before was smudged, her confidence shattered. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Kevin tried to speak, but the other agent cut him off. "Sir, we have a warrant to search the premises. Step aside." The next 2 hours were chaos. Boxes of documents were confiscated, computers taken, accounts frozen, and phones seized. For the first time, Victoria saw it clearly. Her perfect life, the one she thought she stole, was crumbling like dust between her fingers. Across town, Margaret sat quietly in Harrison's office, sipping tea as she watched the updates roll in. For months, she had cried herself to sleep, questioning her worth, drowning in pain. Now she was calm, because justice had finally arrived. And for the audience, there's a strange, undeniable satisfaction. The daughter who betrayed her mother was finally paying the price. The room was silent. Margaret sat alone, clutching the small black USB drive Harrison had handed her earlier. Her hands trembled as she plugged it into the laptop. The screen flickered, and there he was, Robert Sullivan, the man she loved for 43 years. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of heartbreak. "If you're watching this, Margaret, it means I'm gone. And if Victoria is here too listening, then I was right about her." Victoria stood frozen across the room, her breath shaky. Robert continued, "Victoria, if you're hearing this, it means you chose greed over family. I prayed I was wrong. I prayed you'd protect your mother. But you proved me right. And because of that, you will lose everything." For a moment, there was nothing but the soft static of the video ending. Victoria's knees buckled. Her mascara-streaked tears fell into the marble floor as she collapsed, sobbing uncontrollably. "Daddy, no, please, I didn't mean, I thought I—" But there was no one left to hear her cries. Robert was gone, and his words were final. Across the room, Margaret's chest ached, but her face remained steady. She had spent weeks drowning in grief, but now she knew Robert had prepared her for this moment. Victoria's sobs filled the silence, yet for the first time, Margaret didn't move to comfort her. The roles had changed. The mother was no longer the victim, and the daughter could no longer escape the truth. Victoria's hands shook violently as she crawled across the cold marble floor, tears blurring her vision. She clung to Margaret's dress, her voice cracking through sobs. "Mom, please, I made a mistake. I was wrong. Please forgive me." Her cries filled the room like thunder rolling through an empty canyon. Margaret stood perfectly still, her shoulders straight, her eyes steady. Weeks of betrayal, grief, and humiliation had hardened her heart. She slowly lowered her gaze, meeting Victoria's swollen, tear-streaked face. Her voice was calm, but razor-sharp. "Daughters don't forge documents to steal from their mothers." The words cut deeper than any scream could. Victoria shook her head violently, clinging harder, her nails digging into the fabric of Margaret's skirt. "I didn't mean to." Kevin said it was the only way. I just wanted to keep the house to protect us." Margaret didn't flinch. "No, Victoria. You wanted power. You wanted control. And in your hunger, you destroyed the one thing you should have protected: family." Victoria broke into uncontrollable sobs, collapsing fully onto the floor. For the first time in her life, she realized nothing she could say would undo what she had done. Margaret turned away, not out of cruelty, but out of strength. She had loved her daughter with every piece of her heart. But now trust had died, and some wounds could never be healed. Just when Margaret thought the storm was over, a new shadow crept into her life. Kevin's family, desperate and cornered, launched a deadly counterattack. One evening, Margaret received an unmarked envelope slipped under her motel door. Inside, a single photograph, Robert, her late husband, shaking hands with a man Margaret had never seen before. And taped to the photo was a single note. "We know what Robert did. Pay us or the world will." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. Her trembling fingers clenched the paper so tightly it nearly tore. Kevin called minutes later, his voice colder than ice. "You want your money, fine, but if this gets out, you'll lose everything. Robert wasn't the man you thought he was." Margaret's heart pounded, questions raced through her mind. What did Robert do? Why would Kevin have this photo? And why now, for the first time since regaining control? Margaret felt fear creep back in. Harrison, the family's lawyer, studied the photo under harsh fluorescent light. His voice was low, sharp, deliberate. "Margaret, if this is real, Robert might have been involved with something much bigger than we thought. And if Kevin's family exposes this, it won't just destroy your reputation. It could erase everything Robert built and everything you just reclaimed." The walls seemed to close in around Margaret. She thought the battle was over. She was wrong. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was war. Margaret couldn't sleep. Kevin's threats echoed in her head, and the mysterious photo haunted her thoughts. She needed answers. The next morning, she hired a private investigator, a sharp, relentless man named Daniel Kane, known for uncovering secrets nobody wanted revealed. 2 weeks later, Daniel returned, his face pale, his voice low. "Margaret, I found something. Your Robert was connected to an international money laundering network." Margaret froze, her heart pounding in her chest. "That's impossible. Robert was a banker, yes, but he wasn't a criminal." Daniel slid a folder across the table. Inside were photographs, financial statements, offshore wire transfers, and coded ledgers. Robert's name was everywhere. Daniel hesitated, his jaw tightening, before he spoke. "This isn't small, Margaret. This network moved billions of dollars through fake charities, shell companies, and hidden accounts. And Robert's fingerprints are all over it." Margaret's world tilted. Her husband, the man she loved for 43 years, was tangled in something darker than she could have imagined. But before despair could consume her, Daniel leaned closer. His voice dropped to a whisper. "There's more. A lot more. And if I'm right, Robert wasn't who you thought he was." Margaret's breath caught. The ground beneath her felt like it was crumbling away. The truth about Robert was far bigger and far more dangerous than she ever imagined. Margaret's hands trembled as she walked into the FBI field office. She had asked for an urgent meeting after Daniel's shocking discovery. Inside, Agent Laura Mitchell, a seasoned investigator, slid a classified folder across the table. "Mrs. Sullivan, there's something you need to know about Robert." Margaret braced herself, her heart pounding. Laura took a deep breath. "Robert Sullivan wasn't laundering money for criminals. He was working against them." Margaret blinked, confused. What do you mean?" Laura opened the folder, revealing photos, surveillance logs, and signed federal documents. Robert was a deep-cover FBI agent. For the last 12 years, he infiltrated one of the largest international money laundering networks in the world. Everything he did, every transfer, every offshore account, was part of an operation we've codenamed Operation Black Veil. Margaret's jaw dropped. Her husband, the quiet, loving man she thought she knew, had been living a double life. Laura leaned closer, her voice firm but reassuring. "The $33 million isn't dirty money, Mrs. Sullivan. It's part of an FBI-protected fund. Robert secured it legally before his death, and as his sole beneficiary, you're fully protected." Margaret felt her chest tighten, but this time from relief and disbelief. But Laura wasn't finished. "This also means one thing: Victoria and Kevin have no leverage. Their threats, their blackmail, it's over. From this moment, you control everything." Margaret closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. For the first time since Robert's death, she felt powerful again. The plan was simple but dangerous. Margaret, alongside Agent Laura Mitchell in the FBI, had one goal: catch Victoria and Kevin red-handed. Inside a luxury downtown hotel, Margaret sat alone at the negotiation table, her face calm but her heart racing. Hidden inside her necklace was a tiny recording device, connected directly to the FBI surveillance team in the next room. Minutes later, Victoria and Kevin walked in, their smiles cold and calculated. "Victoria, all right, Mom, sign this settlement, and we'll forget everything about Dad's offshore accounts. $5 million clean." Deal. Margaret kept her composure. She nodded, pretending to agree. As she reached for the pen, Kevin leaned in, whispering with a smirk, "You don't sign, we ruin Robert's name. We leak everything." The moment the words left his mouth, that was the trigger. Suddenly, the door slammed open. "FBI hands where we can see them." Within seconds, 6 agents stormed the room, guns drawn surrounding Victoria and Kevin. Shock and panic flashed across their faces. "Kevin, wait. This isn't what it looks like, Agent Mitchell. It looks exactly like extortion, Mr. Harris." Victoria's knees buckled. Her perfect world, the lies, the manipulation, the greed came crashing down in one single moment. Margaret didn't move. She just stared, silent, composed, powerful. The tables had turned, the betrayers had fallen. The courtroom was silent. All eyes were on Victoria and Kevin as the judge delivered the verdict. Judge Victoria Harris, Kevin Harris, for fraud, forgery, and extortion, this court sentences you to 18 months in federal prison. Victoria's face went pale. Kevin lowered his head in shame. Their empire of lies had finally collapsed. Across the room, Margaret Sullivan sat quietly, her hands folded, her heart steady. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. But deep inside, she felt something shift. For the first time in months, she was free. Days later, Margaret received the official documents confirming her full inheritance, $33 million USD, the family estate control of Robert's remaining assets. Margaret stood in the grand hallway of her home, and whispered softly, "Robert, we did it. They can't hurt us anymore." The camera lingers on her face, no longer the fragile woman abandoned by her daughter. She is stronger, wiser, untouchable. From a grieving widow, from a betrayed mother, she has risen. Margaret Sullivan, no longer the victim, but the queen of her own story. Months passed, but Margaret Sullivan didn't stop at reclaiming her life. She turned her pain into purpose. With part of her $33 million inheritance, she founded the Elder Justice Foundation, an organization dedicated to protecting seniors from financial abuse, manipulation, and neglect. The media quickly picked up her story. Headlines exploded, from betrayal to justice. The Margaret Sullivan story: mother outsmarts greedy daughter, builds fund to protect thousands. Her courage inspired thousands of families across the country. Victims started reaching out to the foundation every day, mothers, fathers, grandparents, all sharing their pain and finding hope through Margaret's mission. Then one morning, Margaret received an unexpected call. "Mrs. Sullivan, this is Netflix. We'd like to produce a global documentary about your story." Months later, cameras rolled inside Margaret's restored home, capturing her journey from heartbreak to betrayal to ultimate victory. When the documentary premiered, it became a global sensation, sparking conversations about elder abuse, family greed, and the power of resilience. Margaret Sullivan had become more than a survivor. She was now a symbol of justice, hope, and strength for millions. Months turned into a year, but one thing never changed. Victoria kept sending letters. Every envelope carried the same words: "I'm sorry, Mom, please forgive me." But Margaret never replied, not out of hatred, but because she had learned the deepest truth of her life. Some wounds don't heal with apologies. Some betrayals leave scars that forgiveness cannot erase. Margaret understood now that family isn't defined by DNA, it's defined by love, loyalty, and protection. Standing by the window of her restored home, watching the sunset over the garden Robert once planted, she whispered softly to herself and to every soul who had been betrayed by someone they loved: family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who protects you when you're vulnerable. And with that, Margaret closed the last chapter of her old life, ready to begin a new one, stronger, wiser, and finally free. Margaret's journey teaches us something powerful. Never underestimate your own strength. Even when the world turns its back on you, your courage can rebuild your life. Family is not always defined by blood. True family is made of those who stand by you, not those who betray you. Know your worth and protect it. Margaret stopped being the victim the moment she realized her value. And once she chose to fight back, she reclaimed her dignity, her freedom, and the life she deserved. Her story is a reminder for all of us. No matter how deep the betrayal, you always have the power to rise, to heal, and to write your own ending. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to our channel, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs hope today.